Austin Ekeler has spoken out for the first time since requesting a trade from the Chargers, and after hearing his demands, I don't think the Chargers are going to be willing to pay him what he wants, and it's unclear if any other team would either.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer. We've been covering the Chargers together now for 7 seasons, but this is our 5th season as a host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you guys, as always, for making this your first listen, and to make sure you never miss the show, make sure you're subscribing or following for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And today we're talking about Austin Ekeler airing out some dirty laundry and talking about what he wants to get paid and potentially double what he's getting paid right now, even though the running back market would beg to differ. Don't blame him, understand both sides of it, but it's going to be interesting to see if and when he could get traded, because it's going to be hard to think that other teams are going to be willing to give up the compensation and also be willing to pay him what he wants to be paid. But we're also going to talk about some free agent options, including Kyle Van Noy or John Johnson III, and also potentially if the Chargers could target Elijah Moore to solve some of their wide receiver issues. But today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise? Then this game is definitely for you. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDON, all caps, in the game. David, Austin Ekeler finally spoke, and he was on the Green Light Pod with Chris Long, a former NFL player, and Chris Long gets it, and I understand what Austin Ekeler was saying, but one of the biggest takeaways was just what he was, what he wants coming from him, which is saying, hey, I've been underpaid for a long time. I've been way outperforming my contract, which is true. I could be making double what I'm making right now, which for him would be about $12.5 million. And if that's the number he's really seeking right now, very hard to believe that the Chargers are going to be able to meet that.
Yeah, it is very, very difficult to believe that because, I mean, you consider that number. I mean, $12.5 million, that's what Derrick Henry is making right now per year. And also just looking at the running back market, the way it's unfolded this offseason, Daniel, I mean, I think the highest average annual value that a running back has achieved is about $7 million per season. So it just given that information, it just seems highly unlikely that he's going to be able to get the number that he seeks.
Yeah, if you're talking about outside of franchise tag running backs, the most so far is Miles Sanders, 4 years, $25 million, 6.25 per season. And that's what Austin Ekeler is making right now. Only 2 running backs in this class, 2 guys who are not nearly as good as Austin Ekeler, and him and David Montgomery, but are the only 2 running backs that have made even $6 million, right? And I get it, right? This is what he said. I feel like there's no timeline on when he could potentially come back. I'm so underpaid right now as far as my contract and what I contribute to the team. It's like I'm relentlessly pursuing this. I want to get something long-term done. I want a team that wants me long-term, and I get it. He says he's at the peak of his game, and he's right. He should want to go get this. And I understand why this upsets fans hearing him kind of air some of this out, right? And saying like, hey, pay me. Like, I'm not getting paid what I should get paid. At the same time, it could be a lot worse, David. I mean, he's saying he's not bashing the franchise, right? He's saying he will come back and play out his contract if he has to. So I understand why fans are upset about it, but I don't blame him at all for trying to go get his money.
Absolutely not. I mean, let's remember, everybody, like the NFL is a business, right? And so especially when we're considering the running back position, we understand that the shelf life for the running back position is very, very short in the NFL. And also he is coming off of 2 seasons where he scored close to 40 touchdowns. So, I mean, I think the production is clearly there. And so he knows that he feels like he should be getting a lot more money than what he's being paid right now. It's just looking at those contracts, it's hard to imagine that he's going to be able to get that right now. I know that this is, something that's a little bit infuriating for some fans, and I get that, but you got to remember, this is a business, and these guys are going to try to do everything they can to try to get what kind of value they can while they can.
And it makes a ton of sense for him. I mean, I think the biggest reason he's doing this is because the Chargers basically told him, we're not going to negotiate an extension with you.
Right.
And I understand once they say that, he's saying, hey, let me go find a team that will pay me long-term because I'm at the peak. He's probably not going to have another 2, seasons back-to-back where he has 38 touchdowns. It's probably just not going to happen, right? So like I get why he's doing it. At the same time, that's just not what running backs are getting paid right now. And if you look at the teams who are paying more than $10 million for their running backs, besides the teams that are placing the franchise tag on them this year, it's 49ers, where it's kind of still wait and see. Looked really good.
Yeah.
Christian McCaffrey did. The Saints out of the playoffs last year. The Vikings playoff embarrassment last year, and they could potentially cut. Dalvin Cook has been on the table for them. Then you have the Titans, and that's falling apart over there. The Browns, who aren't any good, and you have the Packers, who missed the playoffs last year as well, paying Aaron Jones what they're paying him. So like, it's not like a proven model where paying running backs is going to work out. And if you're looking at other teams, are other teams going to be able to pay him for an extension that doesn't start until he's 29 years old, right? At 10 plus, 12 plus $1 million per season. I just don't necessarily see that happening. And also that team wanting to give the Chargers compensation for that. But it does feel like, even though he's saying there's no deadline, if a trade is going to happen, it would seem like it would have to be before this draft. Because if you're not getting, someone who could potentially contribute this year, or a chance to, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But when also talking about the team, David, and, he seemed excited about the season.
Yeah.
It's not personal with him. I understand why he's saying it. I don't necessarily know why fans are getting so upset about it, because in the same position, if it was their job and they were trying to do the same thing, they would do the same thing. And Austin Ekeler is really good, which still gets underrated every day on social media, and people just think he's a check down back. Couldn't be further from the truth. Just because that's all he was getting was check downs doesn't mean that that's the best way to use him. Kellen Moore might have a better way. And when he was talking about playing for Kellen Moore, David, he seemed really excited, and also said he has some unfinished business after the way the season ended last season.
Yeah, I mean, it was very clear that 27-0 type of game, obviously against the Jacksonville Jaguars, is still very much on his consciousness right now. It's something that is a lot of fuel going forward. He said, "Hey, we have some unfinished business in the playoffs. We got to get back there. We should have went way further than we did." And he's speaking in these terms, we and I, he's still part of the team. So this is a much different situation than what we have seen before. He understands that he's kind of in between a rock and a hard place. So, I mean, if he has to finish out his contract, he's excited to do that. He sees, the opportunity with the Chargers. He says that there's a lot more that this Chargers offense can do. And he's absolutely right. So, I mean, we'll see what happens with this situation, but I feel like he kind of understands that, he's going to try to get his value. And of course, why wouldn't he? But I think the eventuality is he's probably going to have to finish out his contract and, have to figure out what happens after that.
And if there was any ill will, I just don't know if you'd be talking about that. The Chargers got ranked 30th out of 32 teams as far as their facilities and stuff go, right? He's not out here bashing what they have and making as much of a mess of it as he could. I understand it. But yeah, I mean, I think if you're a fan and you hear, I'm bringing that same energy, these boys better be ready, because when I see them, I got 27-0 on my mind. We lost that game. We want to get back. That's the right energy to have.
I love
the
it.
Chargers should be on a, redemption arc this season.
Yes.
And I understand. I think a lot of this stems from, comments about Justin Herbert. And even when he was on our show, when we had him on, you guys can go back and listen to it. Like, he wasn't overly complimentary of Justin Herbert, right? But at the same time, I think it's not as critical as, people think. And he got put in a bad spot. But I don't necessarily think he's ever saying anything to try to disparage his teammates, and seemed like a pretty well-liked teammate from everyone. It's not like you see the disconnect with his teammates already. And if you ask every one of his teammates, you know what they're going to say? Any Chargers player, go get your money. They're all going to say that.
Absolutely.
Per man. They're all going to say that. So I understand why he's doing it. I understand why fans are upset about it. But, I would give him a contract extension. You don't have anyone else right now, as the roster's currently constructed, to take over this mantle if he is playing out his last season. But I wouldn't give him those numbers necessarily. So we'll get into that. But I do need to tell you guys that today's episode is brought to you by the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Chargers podcast and the NFL, and an official sportsbook partner of the NBA, and that is FanDuel. Right now, it's a great time to get in with FanDuel, guys, because the tournament is heating up right now, about to get started tomorrow again, and the craziness can ensue with lots of upsets and things like that, and chances to win big money. And right now, it's a great time because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. So just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. And right now, it's a great time to do it. Make sure you get in on it, guys, and you can be betting on player points, rebounds, assists, things like that. You can even go 2x3, which is two 3-pointers in the first 3 minutes of a game. Hard to do, Big payout, though, if it does happen. And you can also get the same game parlay with FanDuel. So don't miss out on that chance for that no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Well, David, we did talk about, Austin Ekeler and him sounding off a little bit, but it is a Chargers mailbag day as well. And we want to get into some of what you guys had for us, which were some great questions, including starting with Mariano Castillo, who asked, given the underwhelming running back market this offseason, do you think the Chargers extend Ekeler for 2 more years with an out after his last year, or are we looking at more of a Melvin Gordon type situation? I don't think it's a Melvin Gordon type situation, David, but are you willing to give him a contract extension, right? Is there a number that you think would work? And we know we're not trying to see him get paid, $12 million, or it just doesn't fiscally make sense for NFL teams to do that right now, even if you could argue he deserves it. What would a good, extension look like in your mind?
So first of all, absolutely, I would definitely give Austin Ekeler a contract extension. He's earned it, quite frankly. I mean, he is one of the biggest catalysts of this Chargers offense, and he has been ever since he's gotten starting snaps. So that let's just say that right away. I think if we're looking at a contract extension, I think a number that I feel like could get something done here is somewhere in the neighborhood of $9 to $10 million per season. I think that's where that sweet spot is going to have to be. I don't think there's any possible way that we get north of $12 million per season. I just think that's a non-starter. So I feel like you're going to have to look at numbers in that area. I think 9 to 10 is probably what if it does get done eventually is where it will have to be settled at.
Yeah, no, I agree with at least the AAV of that. But the amount of years, I think, is where it gets tricky, right? Because like I said, any extension is him playing in his age 29 season and then on. I think his game will age fine. A lot of people said they thought he was washed this season. I think he's fine. I think his game will age well. And I think you could still, bring other people into the mix even if you give him that. I wouldn't want to give him any more than a 1-year extension right now. I find a hard time believing he would do that. If they want to bump him up a couple, $1.5 million for this season, guarantee the contract for this season, and give him another, $8.5 to $9 million next year, and say, listen, I'm giving you $3 million more than anyone made on the open market this year. And if you were on the open market, it's hard to imagine you would make much more than this.
Right.
Gives him some security in case he gets hurt this year. He's not trying to get another contract as he's coming off an injury, and that's always
it's like what Melvin Ingram did in the last year of his contract. He's like, hey, I'm not guaranteed at all, and I don't have any guaranteed money whatsoever. Eventually, that was the solution, and he got him back in camp and in practice.
But he's also saying he wants a long-term deal, right? So I'm also not here saying, hey, I want to for sure. Like, financially, it probably makes the most sense to let him play this out. If he's still playing at the same level, you can franchise tag him next year. That's what financially makes the most sense. Not doing the best by their players, obviously, and that's important. Yeah. But they have some flexibility there. If they want to potentially get him a little less than that and kind of split the difference, meet him somewhere around 9, through the 2024 season, I could get behind it because, again, there's no clear backup plan on the roster. Hopefully there is, and hopefully that gives them some flexibility and some more leverage next year when these negotiations come up again. But let's get to the next question here from Bolt Up Andrew, saying, if you can only sign one of these guys, who would you rather have, John Johnson III or Kyle Van Noy? Both have experience in the Staley system and would provide much-needed depth. David, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I think when I'm looking at this question, I look at what position is of a higher priority, and that has to be the starting position that's currently open at safety. So as much as I loved Kyle Van Noy and what he did towards the end of the season, really, doing his best work, 5 sacks in the last 5 games, really helped propel, this Chargers team to get into the playoffs. I think his contributions were great, but you need a starting safety. I mean, you need to add to that room. You need to, and I think bringing in a guy like John Johnson, who is just really understands this scheme, is very versatile, and a guy that you would feel really good about putting next to Derwin James. I just think that's the situation for me. That's what I would prefer the Chargers to do, and I feel like that has the highest potential for them to have the best success and get the most value out of that deal.
Yeah, I think the argument, if you wanted to go with Kyle Van Noy, would be, hey, not only could you get kind of, an extra veteran edge rusher to fill in like you needed him to last season, but you maybe also get some help at middle linebacker, which is what he was supposed to play anyways. Maybe that takes a little bit off of Kenneth Murray's plate. especially if the Chargers decide to draft an edge rusher earlier. And that's part of the reason I would go John Johnson here, is because I'm hoping the Chargers invest a draft pick in a young guy that can potentially, be on a cheap contract and not just keep doing the 1-year Band-Aids at edge rusher.
Right.
I would go with John Johnson also because, I just want to see Derwin James play with the best safety he's ever played with, right? I think that's, one of the most appealing things about it to me is seeing what that looks like, especially given that it's a known commodity and the guys that returned to Brandon Staley's system last season did really well,
really good,
and picked it up pretty darn quickly when you think of Morgan Fox and Bryce Callahan and guys like that. Even Troy Reader looked good in practice, and when he was forced into action, like guys that already know it have a huge step up, which I understand why you're picking both these guys. I'd go with John Johnson though, starting position potentially. Even though you have Alohi Gilman, but the best safety Derwin James has ever played next to, which is cool. I want to see that a lot.
Agreed.
Let's go to K-Man here, who's asking, do you feel the Chargers are done with free agency as far as the acquisitions or signing of their own players? Let's think about signing of their own players. I'm not sure who would still be in the mix. I think Braden Fehoko is a guy that makes a lot of sense, especially since he's still unsigned. But, David, I think the hard thing here is the Chargers almost 100% will add someone in free agency. I'll put it down 100%. They're going to sign someone before the season starts, probably multiple players. It's just when that's going to happen.
No question. And that's definitely the important thing to bring up here is because as we were talking about before we started recording today is that there were several guys that were signed after the draft. Kyle Van Noy, Bryce Callahan, those guys ended up being huge key contributors for the Chargers defense
Morgan
last
Fox
year.
as well. All those
Morgan
dudes
Fox
signed in May. So we have a little while before May.
Right. So, absolutely. They're not done. They shouldn't be done. There's definitely still work to do. They have to bring more guys in. I feel like it might be a minute if they don't sign John Johnson. I think that's probably the last, kind of big fish that's on a hook right now until after the draft. Then they, see where the dust settles from there. And then, they go attack needs after that point.
Yeah, and I'd like to see some holes, get filled, obviously, before the draft because I think it gives you some more flexibility there.
Absolutely.
Just if you have some of these positions more figured out, especially with all of the positions that they still need a lot of depth at. We talked about the big ones, the wide receiver, edge rusher and things like that, but, there's really, you could point anywhere and find somewhere that the Chargers have a big need at. But a few of them you feel like they have to take at the top of the draft. So we're going to talk about which positions at this point we want the Chargers to take early, and also talk about what if they just cancel another one of their needs off the list before the draft and just go ahead and go trade for Elijah Moore. Because, hey, a lot of things are changing in New York. If they're considering it, the Chargers should definitely be calling because that is someone that I like a lot more than a lot of the prospects I see in this current draft. But we're going to talk about that after this. But I need to tell you guys that today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. You've heard me talk about this mobile game app, and if you've ever thought you'd make a good GM, you've got to give this game a try because it's not as easy as you might think to create a dynasty. Chargers fans know that because the Chargers have never been able to get one, let alone make a dynasty. But I'm finding out the hard way trying to, put my application in for GM of the Los Angeles Chargers by Ultimate Football GM. 2-14 my first season, still 16 games on there. Really upsetting that a team did worse than me. I didn't even end up with a number 1 overall pick after only winning 2 games. I Texans myself with a late win that cost me the number 1 overall pick in the draft. But I'm getting there. Slowly but surely, 4 wins, 5 wins. It's such an addicting game. There's so many realistic parts about it, including hiring your coordinators, doing free agency, the draft, scouting, all of those things, all in a challenging and realistic game world. Right now, guys, make sure you go check this game out because Locked On Chargers listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On. All caps in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps. So make sure to check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. We do have some more questions we want to get into from Twitter. A lot of everyone, contributing to the show, which we really, really appreciate. And you can always hit us up when we do these shows at Locked On LAC or in the YouTube comments or in the Apple Podcast review, pretty much wherever. We'll try to get on the show. But this is an interesting question I want to start with here from Ryan Roloff, who's not talking about free agency, but another way the Chargers could potentially upgrade their roster. And he says, if Tom Telesco was open to trading draft picks, do you think it'd be smart to target a wide receiver or swing tackle before or during the draft? For example, the Jets have been adding to their wide receiver core, still in talks with Odell Beckham. Maybe they have to make some tough decisions going forward. I'm going to make this all about Elijah Moore because if I'm talking about the Jets, that's the dude I want to target. A dude that's been outwardly kind of against the Jets and spoke out against them last season. And someone that, has been really, really good quietly so far in his young NFL career. David, if that dude is on the block, I'm 100% interested.
Definitely, 100%. I mean, you look at this guy, you look at the stats, and the thing that screams out to you is underutilized. There's no question. I mean, 80 receptions, 984 yards, reception percentage of 60. And then the other thing, when I say that reception percentage of 60, but only 2 drops in 2 seasons, really, really bad quarterback play. So he just has not been able to really showcase what he is able to do. And you take his skill set, his ability to get yards after catch, like just some of the special things that he can do and the speed, and you put that with Justin Herbert, a guy who can make any throw on the football field, definitely sign me up yesterday. Get it done. No question.
The Chargers traded their second-round pick for Khalil Mack last year. I would 100% trade their second-round pick this year to go get Elijah Moore. Gives you flexibility with that pick at 21 to get, really good edge rusher. You could even potentially think about tight end at that point if you wanted to. Gives you much more flexibility, and you have 2 needs at wide receiver figured out. You got a dude who ran a 4.34 at his pro day, and also a dude who really, really gets open and has some yak. So, those are all things, the Chargers could use. And it gives you a cheaper option for 2 seasons. And if it's me, I know this guy has spoken out and said, bad things about his quarterback and getting targets. And Daniel Popper, when we talked to him about it, was like, hey, where is he going to get targets in this offense with Josh Palmer, Mike Williams, and Keenan Allen? I'm saying this, hey, I have someone in Kellen Moore who will know how to use you. You will be a big part of the offense this year, especially if injuries happen. You'll have an even bigger role. And then next year, there's a good chance that we don't see Mike Williams and Keenan Allen on this roster. Then it's the Elijah Moore show going into a contract year for him. So that's my sales pitch. It's on the coaches. Get him in here. Figure out the rest later. The dude is super talented. He's one of the best receivers in the NFL at getting open against man or zone coverage through his first couple of seasons. Even if the stats are underwhelming, buy low on this dude. He would explode in the Chargers offense, in my opinion. But let's get to the next question here from Dubsack, who's asking, since the Chargers have addressed a bunch of needs with in-house signings, what would you rather the Chargers do in the draft early? Address edge depth or wide receiver or tight end? What do you think, David?
Well, if we're talking about addressing first, as in at 21st overall, I'm definitely not going to go edge depth there. I think I want to give somebody, and that somebody is Justin Herbert, someone very dynamic, a very dynamic offensive weapon, whether that's a tight end, whether that is a speed receiver. I really, really think it is 100% necessary that you give Justin Herbert somebody to grow with on a cost-controlled contract that he can really kind of have that Batman and Robin situation with, which Keenan Allen is fantastic. Obviously, he's been in the league for 10 years. And he's one of the most expensive receivers in the NFL. So getting Justin Herbert a new, crazy, awesome weapon on a low rookie contract, that's the move for me. You got to make it happen.
Yeah, I think the hard thing is there's not a lot of receivers I love at 21, right, that I think are going to be there. I mean, the real answer is you should be addressing all 3 of those positions early, right?
Well,
and by early, you're talking about day 1, day 2, rounds 1 through 3. I could see the Chargers going all 3 of those positions, right? Could go in other ways, too. I mean, you picked Brian Branch. Talking about offensive weapons, I picked Jack Campbell in the second round. That doesn't fit any of these needs we're talking about here.
Right.
Obviously, John Johnson changes that, right? And we'll have mock drafts after that. But, I'm going edge if Nolan Smith is there. You talk about
I'll agree with
all
that.
you want. I mean, there's guys for all these positions I would take there if they were available. I would rather it be one of these 3 positions, though. There's other positions I would definitely like a lot less if the Chargers decide to go that direction at 21. But let's get to another question here. You have something else, Dave?
No, I was just going to say I saw Warren Sharp actually in his mock draft take an offensive lineman in the first round. So that better not happen. I will be very angry if I see them taking out another offensive lineman for a 3rd straight year.
It's crazy that you can even be annoyed that the Chargers could take a 3rd offensive lineman because the fact that they spent 2 straight your first-round picks on offensive linemen is mind-boggling.
I know.
But you have all of your starting positions set right now. It's definitely something that has to be addressed, and I'd say in free agency and potentially in the draft. But at the same time, I mean, that's wild. I couldn't see that happening. Depth is important, though, and that's what Omar Barsanis is here to say today. I love listening to you guys. What are your thoughts on the team's depth which position's depth is vital for the team's success in this coming season. So just talked about that, right? Like all three of those positions are depth. Wide receiver is depth. Tight end is depth.
Yeah.
Edge rusher is depth. And we talked a lot yesterday and talked about those positions that we need to see the Chargers address the depth. I think when you're talking about what's most vital, I mean, I think wide receiver and edge rusher, considering the injury questions, going into the season and not being able to put all of your eggs in that basket. But I think one of the most underrated kind of parts of the Chargers' depth here, David, for me, it's at linebacker and it's at offensive line, because I think now I don't feel great about the depth at either of those positions, and they're two that we've talked about fewer than I think the rest.
Well, you got to learn from your past, right? You look at last season. I mean, if you don't learn from your past, then you're doomed to repeat it. And so last year, you really had an issue with wide receiver depth. That was very clear. It reared its ugly head.
Michael Bandy, DeAndre Carter.
Right, being Jason Moore being active on game days. Which, I mean, let's be honest, that really shouldn't happen ever. So you need to add more to your wide receiver room. You need to add to your offensive line always. Like there has to be quality backups. That's just a position of attrition. Defensive line, also another position you just need to have able bodies at.
Dave, defensive line's a good one too.
It's just very, very important. Edge rusher,
because
obviously.
Of Austin Johnson and Tito, right? I mean, Tito has a torn patella.
Major injuries.
Ruptured patella. And Austin Johnson, another serious knee injury. Like those dudes, we don't know if they're going to be even ready for the beginning of the season. So if not those guys, then basically it's just Sebastian Joseph Day right now and Morgan Fox, so they just brought back. That's it.
Exactly.
For the most part.
That's why the spine is so important. You got to have guys that can go out there and get the job done, because they play the most physical position on the football field. So
and why Braden Fehoko makes a lot of sense too.
Of course, I mean it's a move that should have been done yesterday. You got to get that one done. I mean, what he brings to the table. He's a guy that can take up those double teams, understands his role, knows his role, and executes his role very, very well. So I just feel like that's something that you got to make happen. But yeah, it's all about the spine.
He's willing to come on the Locked On Chargers podcast, maybe, which is one of the most important free agent, things that you could bring with you.
And he does banger interviews too. I mean, if you haven't seen that one, go check it out.
Takes.
Really? Yeah, iffy on the food takes. I don't know. I'm not. Yeah, the water. I live in Texas.
Maybe that's part of the contract. It's like, hey, we'll bump you up another like $250,000, but like you cannot publicly talk about any food takes on the internet, and that's part of your contract. Until that's done.
That's it, Braden. That's it.
Both sides win.
No more talks. But yeah, just back to the question. Offensive line, defensive line, wide receiver, and edge are all positions you need to have quality depth at if you want to be a serious contender next season.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, all of those are super, super important. And thank you guys again for checking out today's show. And tomorrow we'll give you potential chances to see some depth pieces that could come in for the Chargers in free agency. We're going to get into who is left at this point in free agency. Are there guys out there who can come in and help the Chargers? But thank you guys again for making us your first listen today. If you guys need a second listen, make sure to check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show with the Draft Dudes, with Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino. So glad those dudes are sticking around and bringing a great podcast Monday through Friday about how your team can be that successful franchise and build that dynasty like we were talking about earlier. But thanks for listening, and you can find that show on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts from, wherever you listen to them from, just like you can get this show. But you can also find this show on all of our social media. You can find me on Twitter at DanTalkSports, David Drogemeyer on Twitter at DroTalkSD, and the show's page at Locked On LAC. You can also find us on Instagram at Locked On Chargers and on our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. If you guys want to call in and get your voicemail on the next fan show, I had a couple, can use them for different reasons, but you can call into 323-524-7924. Get your 30-second question in there, and we will get it on the show. But that's it for today. Make sure you're back here tomorrow with some free agents still available for the Chargers. Until then, take it easy and go Bolts.